He said pain was a form of devotion, and we believed him. We were just girls, locked behind convent walls. I watched my best friend flinch when he passed, and when I tried to speak up, no one listened. My name is Grace. I'm 70 now, and for nearly 5 decades I carried the weight of what happened inside that convent. Until one day I came back, with a notebook, with names, with the truth. What would you do if the man who hurt you was celebrated as a saint? Would you stay silent, or would you tear the silence apart to save just one more girl? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Have you ever been forced to choose between faith and the truth? I've spent years avoiding that chair by the window. It's not because it's uncomfortable. On the contrary, it's the coziest spot in this whole place, worn in leather, a cushion that still remembers your shape, and a view that catches the morning light just right in October. But I avoided it because it faces east toward Havenwood Hill, toward the place I said I'd never look back at, until today. This morning, Nurse Carla brought my tea as usual. "You want it by the bed, Miss Grace?" she asked, chipper and sweet. She's new, doesn't know the old rules yet. "No," I said, "by the window." She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Just placed the steaming mug next to the pumpkin spice candle someone lit a few weeks ago, probably to make the place feel festive. It's been burning so low, it gives off more memory than scent now. On the little side table sits a folded letter, yellowed a bit, frayed at the edges. I've moved with it 5 times across 3 states. The envelope is addressed in shaky cursive to whoever still remembers. Some days I thought about opening it. Other days I wanted to burn it. But I kept it. Just like I kept the photo of Sarah tucked into the corner of the mirror. She's smiling in it barely. You can tell she didn't love cameras. But you can also see the kindness in her eyes, the softness she never lost, not even after everything. The world thinks I'm just another old woman who likes her tea warm and her television loud. That's fine by me. Let them think that. It's easier than explaining how silence can become your whole identity. How after a while, even your own name doesn't feel like yours. My name is Grace. At least that's the name I started with. The one I whispered when I took my vows. The one that echoed in the stone hallways of the convent for 13 years before everything went dark. I'm 70 now, and for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I'm ready to speak. You see, people think of convents as holy, quiet places, gardens full of lavender and songbirds, and they are in part. But walls don't just keep the world out. They can also keep pain in. Silence is the heaviest habit we ever wore. And I wore mine well. I used to believe that obedience was the highest virtue, that faith meant endurance, that God's will was always channeled through men with collars and kind smiles. I was wrong. But this isn't just a story about pain. It's about love, too. And sisterhood. And the kind of courage that only grows in the dark. Sometimes I wonder what my voice sounds like to other people. It feels scratchy now, unused, like an old record that's been in the attic too long. But I have something to say, and I won't leave this world until I've said it. I reached for the small black recorder I bought at the drugstore down the road last month. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to unwrap it. It still smells like packaging plastic and faint batteries. I press the red button. Click. "My name is Grace," I say into the hum of late afternoon. I used to be a nun. I lived in the convent on Havenwood Hill. And I have something to confess. My voice wavers. I take a sip of the tea, lukewarm now. Still sweet. I breathe in the candlelight and exhale years of silence. People said we disappeared, I continue. 5 of us one rainy night in 1979. Some claimed we died, others that we ran off with men. But they were wrong. The truth is harder to believe because it hides behind stained glass and hymnals. I glance at Sarah's photo. Her cheeks were fuller then. She was only 19, just a girl, We weren't saints, I whisper into the recorder. We were just girls, and we were terrified. Outside the window, the sun begins to drop behind the maple trees, casting long shadows across the floor. The leaves flutter like nervous pages turning. I lean back in the chair, its old leather creaking softly beneath me. The truth doesn't start with the night we escaped, I say, my voice firmer now. It starts with why we needed to. Click. The recorder stops. For now. The convent sat on a lonely hill, wrapped in mist and mystery, like a secret it never meant to share. Back then, they called it St. Mary's Haven of Peace. A kind name for a place that was many things, but never peaceful, not in the way they meant. It was 1962 when I first arrived, 16 years old, and full of the kind of hope only the young can carry without strain. I remember the gravel crunching under my shoes as I stepped down from the bus, the hem of my dress damp from the morning fog. I clutched a single suitcase worn and sunburned at the corners. It held everything I owned: 2 skirts, a Bible, a tin of mints my aunt gave me, and a folded letter from my mother that I never opened. The gates were taller than I expected. Black iron, rusted at the edges. Behind them, the convent loomed, not grand, not Gothic, but solid. Quiet. Its stone walls were lined with ivy and memory. The kind of place that looked like it had listened for a very long time and said very little. A woman in gray opened the gate. Her face was kind, but unreadable, as though she'd practiced the expression in a mirror until it became natural. "You must be Grace," she said. I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Mother Agnes," she replied. "Welcome. Let's get you settled." Her voice was gentle, her steps quiet. The halls smelled of soap and beeswax of lavender dried in small bunches over the windowsills. The wooden floors gleamed under the light that poured through tall, narrow windows. Every sound felt softened here, like the building had agreed to muffle the world outside. She led me to a small room on the 2nd floor, just wide enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a crucifix nailed to the wall. "This will be yours," she said, her hands folded in front of her. "Morning bells ring at 5. "Yes, ma'am," I said again because I didn't know what else to say. The next morning, I met the others. Sister Martha was the first to greet me. Older, perhaps 40 then, with kind eyes and a laugh that landed like warm bread on a cold table. She handed me a cup of tea and said, "Don't worry, the cold only bites until November." I believed her. Martha had a way of making the convent feel like it might someday be home. Then came Joy. She was younger than Martha, maybe 25, with bright cheeks and fast fingers that braided hair like she was weaving joy into it. I thought her name must have been chosen for her the way birds belong to the morning. She giggled when I fumbled with my habit. "We all trip over it at first," she whispered. "Even the saints." Eleanor was different. Quiet. She read during mealtimes, a habit gently scolded by Mother Agnes, and stubbornly resumed the next day. Her room smelled like ink and candle wax, and her bed always had a folded paper or two tucked under the pillow. She asked me on the 2nd day, "Do you think obedience is the same as faith?" I had no answer. I still don't. And then there was Sarah. She came a week after I did, younger than the rest of us, just 15, with eyes like polished river stones and a voice soft as linen. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. When she did, she always looked down as if the words might get lost on the way out. The first time I noticed her sleeve pulled awkwardly over her wrist, I said nothing. I told myself it was a scratch, a clumsy accident. We all bumped into things in those narrow halls. But that night when I passed her room, I saw her gently pressing a cold cloth against a bruise that bloomed violet and green. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did, and just chose not to stop me. Life in the convent was quiet, but not empty. Days began before the sun. The morning bells rang at 5, and the sound sliced through dreams like a blade. We prayed, we swept, we scrubbed and sang and stitched. There was rhythm in the routine comfort even, like knowing exactly where your feet should land next. We studied Latin, and scripture tended the vegetable garden folded sheets in long, silent rows. In the afternoons, we peeled potatoes or copied hymns by hand. The ink smelled sharp and familiar, like old lessons clinging to young hands. No one raised their voice, not even in frustration. Silence wasn't just observed, it was cultivated, practiced, revered. Even laughter when it came was hushed like Joy's giggles at supper, or Martha humming while baking bread. The first time I heard the chapel bells up close, something inside me shifted. It was just past dusk. The sky was bruised with fading pink, and the wind carried the scent of burnt incense and wet earth. I'd stayed behind after Vespers to tidy the altar linens. The others had gone to supper. Alone, I stepped out into the garden behind the chapel, where the bell tower stood. The bell rang once deep and round, and the sound moved through me like a wave. Beautiful, yes, but it chilled me too. It was the kind of sound that made you feel very small, like maybe you were standing in the presence of something watching, something waiting. I don't know why I felt afraid. Maybe because I knew somewhere deep that beauty and danger are sometimes braided together so tightly we can't tell which is which until it's too late. We thought we had found heaven, but heaven has walls, and walls hold things in. Not all devils come dressed in red. Some wear robes and carry Bibles. It was late spring in 1970 when Father Michael came to Havenwood. The garden was in bloom lilacs, heavy on the bush bees drunk with pollen, and the sun warm enough that even the stone chapel began to sweat by noon. We had just finished planting the summer squash when word arrived that Father Thomas was being moved to a retirement parish by the coast. He'd served us for 17 years, longer than I'd been alive when I arrived. He was gentle. Round in the belly, soft in the eyes, smelled faintly of pipe smoke and old leather. He blessed us without theatrics and told stories in his homilies, some biblical, some from memory. He once caught Joy sneaking a gooseberry tart and simply smiled. God has a sweet tooth too, he said, and walked away. We cried when he left, even Eleanor. The day Father Michael arrived, the wind shifted. I stood on the steps of the garden shed, still in my gloves, when the car pulled up. It was newer than we were used to, shiny with chrome edges and a low, smooth hum. He stepped out dressed in black, a suitcase in one hand, sunglasses pushed up into his dark hair. He smiled wide, too wide. His collar was stiff and white, like it had never been worn before. His shoes didn't squeak. They clicked. I'm Father Michael, he said, shaking hands firmly. What a beautiful place you've all made here. We lined up politely, as was custom. He spoke to each of us in turn. When he reached me, his hand hovered for half a second longer. His gaze held just a bit tighter. His eyes were heavy, like they were always calculating, always choosing which part of you to see and which part to ignore. That night at supper, Joy made a joke about Martha's bread being dense enough to use as bricks. We all laughed. Even Eleanor smirked. And Joy let out this loud, belly-deep laugh full of life and mischief. I can still hear it even now. It was the last time I remember her laughing freely. At first, Father Michael seemed like a blessing. He brought structure, sharp defined homilies, firmer rules for confession. He insisted on punctuality and silence in the dining hall. He had ideas for improving the garden ways to better align our habits with divine purpose. Mother Agnes welcomed the help. So did most of the sisters. They said he was energetic, devoted, ambitious, but I noticed other things. He stood too close. Not in ways that others could name, but in ways you felt in your spine. When he passed behind you in the chapel, it was like walking through cold shadow. When he looked at you during a hymn, it felt like he was reading something private you didn't give him permission to read. And then came the confessions. He changed the rules. No longer behind the curtain. He said it was to remove temptation, not reinforce it. Confessions were done in the small side room, seated face to face. I was the first to question it, and the first to be dismissed. "You've always been overly sensitive," Grace's sister Martha told me one evening, brushing flour from her apron. "He's strict, that's all." But strict didn't explain how long his hand rested on Sarah's shoulder during morning greetings. It didn't explain why her face went pale every time he called her name. Sarah had grown quieter. She never was loud, but there used to be a softness to her silence, like still water in a bowl of light. Now it felt more like the air before a storm. One afternoon I saw it. We were in the back courtyard, gathering herbs for Sunday stew. Sarah was closest to the rosemary bush, crouched low, humming faintly to herself, something I hadn't heard her do in weeks. Father Michael had come to check the grounds, or so he said. The others were busy sorting basil. I bent down to tie the twine around the bundle when I saw his shadow pass behind her. He said something I couldn't hear. She stood slowly, turned. He reached up, brushed something off her shoulder, or pretended to, and his fingers lingered. They traced the line of her collarbone just a beat too long. She flinched. Barely. But it was there, and he smiled. It was not the smile of a shepherd tending sheep. It was the smile of a man testing limits. I dropped the bundle of herbs. The snap startled them both. Sarah turned sharply, her face going pale. Father Michael looked up, adjusted his sleeve, and walked past me without a word. That night I told Martha, and Eleanor, even Joy. They didn't believe me. Martha said I misunderstood. Joy went quiet, stirring her tea until the leaves spun like gilt. Eleanor just pressed her lips together and stared out the window. No one believed me, I whisper now, decades later. Not at first. Until one night, I wasn't the only one who saw. Some things a girl shouldn't have to whisper in a chapel. It was the kind of summer that made the walls sweat. Even the thick stone of the convent couldn't keep the heat out. The chapel candles sagged slightly in their holders, and the scent of incense mingled with wilted garden basil drifting in through the open windows. Everything smelled of prayer and green things dying slowly. I remember Sarah sat in the back pew that evening, knees pressed tightly together, her hands wrapped so tightly around her rosary they left little crescent moons in her palms. Her head was bowed low, not in reverence, but in retreat. I had watched her for weeks now. Watched her flinch whenever Father Michael walked by. Watched how she pulled at her sleeves, how she started to wash her face more often, scrubbing, as if she could erase something no one else could see. That evening, something inside me snapped. Or maybe it finally settled into place. After Vespers, I waited until the others had drifted out, their soft footsteps vanishing down the corridor. I slid into the pew beside her. "You don't have to tell me," I said, "but I already know." She didn't answer. Her eyes stared forward blank until they caught the golden flicker of a single candle struggling against the breeze. The light danced across the bruised hollows beneath her eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in months, though I knew it had only been weeks. I placed my hand gently on hers. She didn't pull away, and then she spoke barely above breath. It started after confession. The words came in fits, like she was vomiting up poison she'd been forced to swallow. He asked questions, not the usual ones. Personal things. Things I didn't understand at first. Then, he touched my wrist. Said I needed correction. I kept my eyes on the candle. Let her speak without interruption. She paused. The second time, he said it was penance. That I had tempted him. Her voice cracked. I didn't even know what he meant. I reached over, brushing her sleeve. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. She rolled the fabric back slowly. Her collarbone emerged pale and fragile. And there, just beneath it, bloomed a bruise. Not blue, not fresh. Yellow and green edged with brown. The kind of bruise that lingers because no one was supposed to see it. He told me to stay quiet, she whispered. That if I said anything, I'd be excommunicated. That I'd burn for making a priest fall. I took a long breath, let it out slowly. He's lying. But he's the priest. And I'm your sister. That night I found Eleanor. She was in the library sorting through hymnals by candlelight. Her room always smelled of parchment and oil ink, the edges of her sleeves stained with graphite. I need to speak with you, I said. She glanced up, then closed the book. She could see the look in my eyes. We sat across from each other at the narrow reading table. The fan above us clicked softly, useless, against the heat. I told her everything. Not just what Sarah said, but what I'd seen. What I'd felt. The pattern. The touches. The too long glances. The questions and confession that left you feeling exposed, ashamed, but not cleansed. When I was done, Eleanor leaned back, her face unreadable. I suspected, she said quietly. I just didn't want to name it. She looked away. Because naming it makes it real. And once it's real, we have to act. I nodded. Then let's act. She was silent for a moment, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a small black notebook. We write it down, she said. Everything. Dates. Details. Exact words. We'll be dismissed as liars. We will, she said, until there's too much to ignore. We spent the next week recording everything we could remember. We met in secret late at night in the sacristy or early before morning prayers. Sarah contributed in whispers. Joy, once light-hearted, had grown quieter, her laughter now stored away like a toy too fragile to play with. She avoided eye contact, especially with Father Michael. When I asked her if anything had happened, she only shook her head. But her eyes never stopped trembling. Martha didn't say much. But she watched. Always watched. And when she passed me one afternoon in the hallway, she pressed a small jar of balm into my hand. For bruises, she said simply, then kept walking. One evening, I found Sarah in the garden, kneeling not to pray, but simply to be still. Her rosary lay in the dirt beside her. She looked up. Do you think God sees? I hope he does. She reached for my hand again. This time, she held on tightly. We had two choices I would later record in the little black notebook. Stay silent or become sinners in the eyes of the church. That was the cost of truth. And we had only just begun to pay it. I thought the truth would set us free. I didn't realize how well the church could build cages out of silence. The train to the city rattled like it carried secrets. I wore my most modest shoes and a heavy wool coat, even though it was too warm for October. The coat gave me bulk, gave me shape, gave me a reason to clutch the inside pocket where Eleanor's notebook sat like a heartbeat, document everything she'd written in the front cover. Even the silence. The bishop's office was on the 4th floor of a red brick building with iron balconies and frosted windows that looked like they hadn't been opened since Vatican II. The secretary didn't ask questions when I gave her my name. She just nodded, handed me a clipboard, and gestured toward a pair of large wooden doors. They opened too easily. His office smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Thick burgundy curtains hung on either side of stained glass windows that muted the world into soft blues and purples. The walls were lined with sacred icons, gold halos, bowed heads, martyrs with eyes too kind for their pain. The bishop stood when I entered. Tall, silver-haired, crisp cassock. His ring caught the light. He extended his hand and smiled. Grace, he said warmly. Or, Sister Grace. I'm here as Grace, I said. He nodded and gestured for me to sit. The chair was softer than expected. Too soft. It made me feel small, as if I were sinking. I understand you're here with concerns, he said, folding his hands across a thick folder. I'm here with the truth. I pulled out Eleanor's notebook and placed it on the desk between us. It looked out of place. Too worn. Too plain. Like a cry for help sitting in a cathedral. He opened it and began to read. Slowly. Page after page. He didn't speak. Just skimmed lips pressed together, eyes scanning names, dates, snippets of phrases written in Eleanor's precise, almost surgical hand. After 10 minutes, he closed the notebook gently. "This is serious," he said. "It's real," he nodded. "I can see that you've gone to great lengths to document what you believe occurred." I flinched. "Believe?" He smiled again, thinner this time. "Sister, please. I don't doubt your sincerity. But you must understand the church has its processes, protocols. It is not our way to make public accusations before proper inquiry. So you'll open one?" "Of course, discreetly." He used that word like a balm, like it was meant to soothe rather than suffocate. "I need you to understand," I said, leaning forward. "This man is hurting people. Girls, children of God. Every day that passes, I will handle it," he said, cutting me off with a wave of his hand. "But you must trust the structure God has built for his justice." I stared at him, then at the folder on his desk. I could see my name on the tab. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he sighed. Long. Practiced. The kind of sigh that ends meetings and absolves guilt. "You must be tired," he said. "Would you like a car back to Havenwood?" I stood without answering. My hands trembled as I took back the notebook. He didn't try to stop me. He only smiled again. That same smile I'd later see in the parish newsletter. That same smile he wore beside Father Michael. I returned to the convent with a pit in my chest. The garden smelled like smoke that night someone had burned the basil too long on the stove. Sarah was waiting by the kitchen door. "He knows," she said, eyes wide, voice cracking. I froze. "What?" "Father Michael. He knows everything." My heart dropped into my shoes. She wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve. "He came to my cell. Said you were spreading lies. Said you'd tried to destroy him once before, and you failed. That next time, it wouldn't go unnoticed." The world narrowed around me. The hallway, the candlelight, her face. "Did he touch you again?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I found Eleanor that night in the library. Her hands were stained with ink. She didn't look up when I entered. "He's coming for us," I said. "I know. I went to the bishop." "I know. He won't help." "I know." I sat beside her, the weight of the notebook like a stone in my lap. "So what now?" I asked. She looked at me then. Her eyes were tired but clear. "Now," she said, "we stop believing they'll save us. And we start thinking like women who need to survive." Outside, the wind rattled the chapel windows. Inside, something ancient shifted in the walls. We had been taught that silence was sacred, but we were learning now it was also a weapon. And the church didn't protect us. It fed him. The plan to escape was born in a root cellar surrounded by silence and jars of pickled beets. It was deep winter, 1977. The ground above us was frozen brittle beneath snow. But beneath the convent, in that stone-lined basement, with its sloped ceiling and shelves of old preserves, something began to thaw. Eleanor held a candle between us. Its flame flickered against the jars, peaches, beans, and carrots suspended in brine, like memories sealed tight. The air smelled of damp soil vinegar and rusted hinges. "If the church won't save us," she said softly, "we'll save each other." Joy sat on an overturned crate, arms wrapped around her knees. Sarah was beside her, the hem of her habit clenched in both hands like a tether. Martha stood near the wall, her expression unreadable, the sleeves of her robe dusted with flour from the kitchens. We didn't speak for a long while. "I don't want to be a runaway," Joy whispered. "If we run, we're guilty in their eyes." "We're already guilty," I said. "Guilty of speaking, of not kneeling fast enough, of not keeping quiet." Joy looked up at me, her eyes rimmed with red. "But what if they're right about us?" Eleanor answered before I could. "If they were right, they wouldn't be afraid of us leaving." Sarah said nothing, but her head tilted forward. A small nod, barely visible, but it was enough. Then Martha spoke. It was the first time she had spoken freely in one of our midnight gatherings. "When I was 12, She said my uncle told me I had the devil in my bones. He said he'd help cleanse me. For 2 years, I believed him. The silence that followed was sharp and immediate. I told my mother, Martha continued, voice steady, and she said I must have misunderstood, that I shouldn't tarnish a man of the cloth. She stepped closer to the candle. I have kept quiet for 40 years. I will not die inside these walls for the comfort of men who build them. That was when we all knew we would run. The plan wasn't elegant. It was desperate. But it had shape. There was a ladder stored in the garden shed, mostly forgotten, covered in ivy and bird droppings. If we used it, we could reach the southern wall, the one that led down to the old utility road, now mostly overgrown. There, we could make our way to the train station in the next town. We couldn't leave together. Too obvious. We would space our escape over one night, slipping out after final prayers. The problem was the gate. Locked. Always. And the keys were held by Father Michael and Mother Agnes. That's where Mr. Miller came in. He delivered produce to the convent every Tuesday, crates of onions, potatoes, cabbages, sometimes fruit when the season allowed. He was old, slow-moving, always wearing the same brown cap, and chewing something he never swallowed. He barely spoke, except for a polite nod or a soft, "God bless." But I had seen him watching. One Tuesday in January, as I helped unload the turnips, I dropped the corner of a crate. He bent to help me and whispered so softly I nearly missed it. "You all right, sister?" I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes were pale blue, watery with age, but alert. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next week, one of the cabbages had a slip of paper tucked deep beneath its outer leaves. "You're not alone. I believe you." I showed it to Eleanor. She read it twice, then lit a match and burned it in the copper basin by her bed. "He's watching, but we can't involve him yet," she said. "Not unless we're sure." Still, something shifted in me after that. Hope doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it hides inside a cabbage. By the end of February, the sisters had each claimed a piece of the plan. Eleanor mapped the wall. Sarah memorized the bell schedules. Joy, despite her fear, offered to distract Mother Agnes on the final night with a made-up illness. Martha, ever the quiet guardian, would prepare the kitchen exit and leave it unlocked just past midnight. And me? I carried the guilt. The notebook. The voices of the ones who couldn't flee. I prayed not to God, but to the memory of every girl who was told to kneel and stay quiet. That night in the garden shed, we found the ladder. It was older than we thought. One rung cracked, the hinges stiff. Eleanor tested it against the wall. It held barely. The wind howled across the yard, scattering snowflakes like secrets. Above us, the chapel bell rang 9 times. Joy shivered. "What if we freeze out there?" "We'll keep moving," I said. Sarah looked up at me. "What if he catches us?" "Then we'll keep running." Martha placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "One more bruise won't stop us now." The candle between us flickered, and in that dim circle of light we made a promise. Not to survive, but to leave. To become sinners in their eyes, so we could reclaim the truth in our own. All we needed now was one good man and a rope. Not all courage is loud. Sometimes it comes with trembling hands and a plain brown envelope. It was early spring of 1978, the kind of March that hadn't yet made up its mind, half frost, half thaw. The convent hallways were always cold, then even when the sun returned. That night, I walked in slippers to the chapel for evening prayers, only to be pulled into the shadows by a hand I didn't expect. Sister Helen. She wasn't strong. Her fingers were delicate, bird-like, and her skin smelled faintly of lavender soap and library dust. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her in the last year. She was one of the quiet ones, a shadow gliding through morning rituals, always kneeling slightly longer than needed, always excusing herself from conversation. Now her eyes were bright and urgent. She whispered, "Come." She led me down the west hall, past the linen cupboard, to her room, one I had never entered. Her door creaked open like it hadn't moved in weeks. The space was tidy, but full lace doilies on every surface, books stacked on the floor in uneven piles, and one candle burning low on her writing desk. Dust floated through the air like it had been waiting all winter for someone to stir it. She closed the door softly, then turned to face me. Her voice shook. "I overheard you, in the root cellar. I know what you're planning." My blood ran cold. I stepped back, nearly knocking over a porcelain figurine. "Sister, please. I'm not going to stop you." Silence. She reached into the drawer of her desk and pulled out a plain brown envelope. It was already sealed. "I've been saving what I could," she said. "I never took final vows. Most don't know that. I came here after my husband died. It was supposed to be temporary. But then time passed and I forgot how to leave." I stood still, barely breathing. Helen held out the envelope. "There's money inside. Not much, but enough for train tickets, for food, for wherever this takes you." "Why?" I asked, voice hoarse. "Why now?" She sat slowly on the edge of her bed, folding her hands over the envelope like it might fly away. "Because I saw what happened to Joy." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I was there last summer, when she returned from confession. Her hands were shaking. Her veil was crooked, and she didn't speak for 3 days. I knew, and I did nothing." She looked up at me, then her eyes not asking for pity, only understanding. I told myself it wasn't my place, that maybe I was mistaken, that God would handle it. She handed me the envelope, but I've stopped believing silence is holy. Later that night, Eleanor, Joy, and I gathered in Eleanor's cell with the curtains drawn. The candle on her desk flickered as the wind pushed through the cracks in the window frame. Joy took the envelope from my hands and stared at it like it might burn her. She was the one who scolded me when I laughed during Mass. Joy whispered. "Told me holiness wasn't cheerful." "She's trying," I said gently. "The way we all are." Joy turned the envelope over, ran her fingers along the seam. "I used to think she watched us because she didn't like us. Maybe she was just afraid." "She still is," Eleanor murmured. "But she acted anyway. That's the part that matters." Joy swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can forgive her." "You don't have to," I said. "Not tonight." There was a long pause, and then Joy did something I hadn't seen her do in months. She stood, walked to the candle, and placed the envelope beside it. "She didn't have a ladder," she said softly. "No escape. But she gave us ours." The next morning, Helen found Joy outside the chapel before morning prayer. I watched from the garden path, pretending to sweep the dew from the stones. Joy reached out, gently, touched Helen's hand. They didn't speak, but Helen bowed her head, and Joy didn't pull away. Later that week, Eleanor tucked the envelope beneath the lining of her satchel. The plan was moving. The ladder had been tested. Mr. Miller was scheduled to deliver eggs the day after next. Sarah had memorized the route to the station by heart. Martha had made extra bread and dried fruit just in case. And now we had a means to travel. A reason to hope. Helen never asked for updates, never pressed. She just lit a candle in her room each night and left her door cracked open like she was holding space for the girls who might never come back. One evening, as I passed by, I saw her sitting at her desk, praying silently. Her hands were folded, but her eyes were open, watching the flame. As I turned the corner, the candle went out without a breeze, without warning. But she didn't move. She just sat there in the dark. "Don't let fear win," she had whispered when I left her room that first night. I already did. Some nights are so long, even morning forgets to arrive. September 17th, 1979. Midnight. The storm came fast, like it had been waiting for us. Rain lashed the windows and puddled on the flagstones outside the convent. Thunder moved in slow waves, not crashing, but rumbling deep in the bones. The wind rattled the shutters, and the garden walls glistened slick and silver in the moonlight. We didn't speak much that day. We prayed. We cleaned. We ate supper with the rest of the sisters. We folded sheets, swept floors, and moved like ghosts through the motions of obedience. but our hearts beat louder with every passing hour. That night, each of us returned to our rooms one final time. I sat on the edge of my cot, fingers trembling as I unfastened the small wooden cross I'd worn for 13 years. I laid it on the dresser beside my comb. My habit, gray threadbare at the sleeves, was folded with careful hands and placed at the foot of the bed. I didn't cry. Not yet. Martha left a prayer card by her pillow. Eleanor tucked one final note into the lining of her hymnal. Joy, I later learned, left her hairbrush behind. Let them remember I had knots, she said. Sarah kissed the edge of her mattress, whispered something too soft to catch, then joined us in the hall with bare feet and wet eyes. The hallway was dim, just enough candlelight to guide us toward the garden doors. We moved like a single shadow. No one spoke. The outer doors creaked as Eleanor eased them open. The wind hit us first, sharp, alive, smelling of wet basil and old stone. The storm had turned the garden into a soaking labyrinth. Mud sucked at our heels, and the rain flattened the herbs and bent the young trees low. The air tasted like copper and sky. The rope was already waiting. Mr. Miller had come during evening deliveries and left it coiled behind the compost pile just like we'd planned. It was thick, knotted, with a steel hook at one end. It smelled of motor oil and pine resin. I carried it to the wall myself. My fingers trembled as I slipped the hook around the upper branch of the old pear tree that leaned toward the stone. I tested the weight. The branch held. Barely. We took turns. Eleanor went first, always the one to walk into unknowns with her eyes open. Her bare feet slipped once, but she caught herself. Reached the top, looked down, and nodded. Joy followed, muttering a prayer that turned into a laugh halfway through. The sound was small but real. It echoed strangely against the wall. Then Sarah. She hesitated at the base. Looked up like the wall might speak. I touched her shoulder. You can do this! She didn't answer, but she climbed. Martha was next. She was the quiet engine behind all of us. I watched her ascend with slow, powerful movements, her breath, even her lips, moving in silent prayer. At the top, she looked back just once and then dropped down. Then it was me. The wall had never looked so tall. Or maybe it was the night that made everything feel impossibly vast. I began to climb. The rain slicked every rung, every knot, every inch of rope. My hands burned from gripping too tight. My knees scraped the stone. At the halfway point, my foot slipped, and I dangled one hand, grasping the rope, the other clawing for the wall. Below me, Joy gasped. Grace. I'm fine, I lied. But my heart was pounding loud enough to drown out the thunder. Then two hands gripped my ankle. Martha's voice steady. Breathe. Let go of the fear. Just climb. I did. When I reached the top, Eleanor reached out and pulled me the final stretch. I landed on my stomach, face pressed to the cold stone, rain drumming against my back like a warning. On the other side, the path sloped down toward the utility road, muddy, narrow, forgotten. At the edge of the tree line, headlights flashed once. Then again. Mr. Miller. We ran. Half slipping, half falling, we scrambled through the brush. The sound of the wind behind us like voices crying out in tongues. My lungs burned. My feet bled. But I didn't stop. The truck door swung open. One by one, we piled in. Miller didn't ask questions, just drove. The engine growled beneath us, steady and real. The cab smelled of wet wool and old tobacco. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass of the window and watched the convent disappear behind us, its towers blurred by rain, its chapel light flickering like a dying star. My fingers curled into the hem of my skirt. I had no habit, no name, no home. Just a body that hurt and a heart that refused to break. We sat in silence, soaked and shivering, backs pressed against each other for warmth. We weren't nuns anymore. We were just women. And we were finally free, if only for a moment. In Cleveland, nobody called me Sister Grace. I became Linda Peterson, niece to no one, widow to nobody. The apartment sat beneath a butcher shop, the kind with blood in the drains and sawdust on the floor. Our unit smelled like steam and thread. The walls sweated in summer and moaned in winter. You could hear the neighbor's radio through the vents, and sometimes at night, rats skittered between the pipes like ghosts with claws. It wasn't paradise, but it wasn't the convent either, and that counted for something. We all took new names. Martha became Millie. Joy called herself Rose. Sarah, now Emily, chose her name in a whisper, like it was a secret worth protecting. Eleanor picked Catherine because it sounded plain enough to pass. I chose Linda because it was the name on a fake birth certificate that fit the fastest. We lived small. Sam, Mr. Miller's cousin, owned the building. He never asked questions, just handed us the key, gave us the rules: rent on time, no parties, keep the door double locked, and left us to it. He brought us a second-hand sewing machine the first week and said they're hiring down at Ashbury Textiles. No one cares who you were, just that you show up. We showed up. 6 days a week, we walked 10 blocks through snow or sweat to the red brick factory that smelled like oil and cotton dust. Inside, the rows of machines hissed and clicked like angry crickets. Women sat hunched at benches, their eyes dull, hands fast. No one asked where we came from. No one cared. That was the mercy of cities. They swallowed you without chewing. The first week, I cried into my pillow at night. The second week, I stopped dreaming of the convent. The third week, I woke up to the sound of a sewing machine and mistook it for chapel bells. I stood in the kitchen that morning in my threadbare robe, listening to the hiss of the steam pipe and the soft clatter of Millie slicing onions. She was humming something faint, an old hymn maybe, but her hands moved like a cook, not a nun. Soup today, I asked. Corn and potato. Midwest style, she said, not turning. My mother used to make it when the bills were late and the fridge was empty. I leaned against the counter. You never told us much about your mother, she shrugged. We weren't on speaking terms when I joined the convent. She died before I took vows. The onions hit the pan with a soft hiss. The kitchen smelled like butter and memory. Do you miss it? I asked. She stirred slowly. The convent. I nodded. I miss the parts that weren't real, she said. The quiet mornings, the gardens, the lie that everything had order and meaning. She handed me a spoon. Taste this, and don't be polite. It was good, warm with just enough salt to remind you were alive. Rose Joy found work as a receptionist 2 months later. She liked phones and calendars and people who didn't ask too many questions. Her laughter came back slowly, like a bird testing the air after a long winter. Catherine volunteered at the library. She said it calmed her, the hush in the paper. She still wrote everything down. Dates, names, rent receipts, favorite soup recipes. Just in case, she said. And Emily, sweet broken Sarah, found Joe. He was quiet, a mechanic. Thick hands, soft voice. He brought her flowers once a week. Never asked why she flinched at loud noises. Never touched her without permission. He wore flannel in summer and blushed when he prayed before meals. I watched her eyes soften around him. That alone made the escape worth it. They held hands in the park like teenagers. She said she wasn't ready for anything more. He said he'd wait. Then came the fall of 1980. Millie collapsed in the kitchen halfway through slicing potatoes. No warning, no noise, just a thud, a knife clattering, a pot tipping over, and bleeding broth onto the floor. The hospital was cold and white and smelled of bleach and waiting. The diagnosis was swift. Aneurysm. Massive. She didn't wake up. No next of kin, no ID. We buried her 3 days later under the name Amelia M. Peterson, born 1931, Ohio. It was the best we could do. There was no funeral, no choir, no incense. Just 4 women in borrowed coats standing under gray sky, while a man with a mole on his chin read Psalm 23 from a pocket Bible. I stood there with numb hands and a burning throat. The name on her gravestone wasn't hers, and I hated that I had to let her go twice. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The soup Millie had made 2 days before still sat in the fridge. I heated a bowl out of obligation and took one bite before pushing it away. The sewing machine clicked behind me, Catherine finishing an apron order. Emily sat in the corner reading. Rose stared out the window like she was waiting for a sign. "I miss her," I said. No one answered. But Rose got up and lit a candle. And Catherine wrote down Millie's real name in the back of a poetry book. And Emily folded her hands and whispered a prayer that ended in tears. We didn't go back to the convent. But the convent never really left us. We carried it in the folds of our names, in the quiet lies we told on job applications, in the way we still folded our hands before meals, even when there was no one to thank but each other. When the second one fell, I stopped pretending that we'd all make it out alive. It was early October 1997. The leaves outside my kitchen window had turned the color of rust and flame. The wind came in low gusts, rattling the gutter and brushing handfuls of orange across the sidewalk. The kettle hummed. The house smelled like apples and worn wood. I sat alone rereading a note I'd nearly thrown away once. Eleanor's handwriting, precise but fading, looped across the top of the page. "Don't let him live as a saint." She had written it years ago on the inside cover of one of her dozens of notebooks. I'd found it while cleaning the same afternoon I'd gotten the call. "She's not doing well," Joy said over the phone. "It's time." I hadn't spoken to Joy Rose for almost 2 years. Not out of anger, just life. Time folds like that when you're busy pretending you're someone else. "She asked for you," Joy said. I took the next train west. The house was small, tucked between 2 sagging fences in a quiet neighborhood of cracked sidewalks and tidy porches. Eleanor's place. Or rather Catherine's, as the neighbors knew her. Inside, it was all dust and books and faint lavender. The radiator knocked in the corner. The windows were covered in sheer curtains that fluttered with the breeze. The sunlight caught the frayed edges of the quilt draped over the bed. She was thinner than I expected. Her cheekbones stood high beneath loose skin, and her eyes had sunk back slightly rimmed in shadow. But they were still sharp. Still Eleanor's. "Hello, old friend," I whispered. She smiled barely. One side of her mouth lifted, the other trembled with the weight of it. Joy kissed her on the forehead, then gave us space. I pulled a chair to the side of the bed and reached for her hand. It felt like paper. Her fingers twitched as if she wanted to squeeze back. "They say you don't have much time," I said softly. "So I won't waste any." She nodded, slow, deliberate. We sat in silence for a while, the kind only 2 women with shared secrets can sit in. "I kept the note," I said. Her eyes lifted slightly, brows raised in faint curiosity. "The one you wrote after Martha died? About telling the truth?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Only a rasp, a wince. I poured a sip of water and helped her drink. "You always said the story needed to be told, that we couldn't die with pretty lies in our mouths." She blinked once. I reached into my bag and pulled out a worn notebook, hers, the leather fraying at the corners. "You remember this?" She nodded, barely. I opened it to the page with the note. Her own words stared back at her. "Tell them. Don't let it be pretty lies." She reached for the pen on her nightstand. It took both her hands to lift it. I steadied the notebook in her lap. Her writing was slow, slanted now, but legible. "Promise me, Grace. Say it out loud." She paused, looked at me. "Say it," she mouthed. My throat tightened. "I promise," I said. She closed her eyes for a long time. When she opened them again, they were wet. Emily Sarah couldn't come. Her youngest had a fever. "She's asking about Auntie Catherine," she said on the phone. I told her she was very loved. "She was," I said. "She still is." That night, I sat by Eleanor's side as the wind howled outside. The curtains danced like whispers, and the trees rattled against the eaves. A candle burned low on the dresser, its light catching the gold threads in the quilt she'd sewn herself. Joy drifted in and out. She brewed tea, hummed old hymns, sat quietly in the corner. Just before dawn, Eleanor stirred. Her lips moved. I leaned in. All stories have endings, she whispered. Even the ones we didn't ask for. Then she reached for my hand, and I held it with both of mine. Her last breath came like the turning of a page, soft, inevitable. The funeral was quiet. No family, no church, just Joy, myself, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot as we stood by the headstone with the name Catherine Hale. Not Sister Eleanor. Not the mind that had mapped our escape. Just a name no one would recognize. She'd have hated the lilies, Joy muttered, trying to smile. I didn't respond. My hands stayed buried in the pockets of my coat fingers, wrapped around that final note in her handwriting. Promise me, say it out loud. That was the last time someone asked me to be brave. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. But the wind keeps knocking. The leaves keep falling. And the truth doesn't forget how to wait. I hadn't said his name in years. But there it was, printed in a church newsletter in gold letters that bled into the paper like wine. Father Michael A. Callahan, celebrating 50 years of devotion. Keynote speaker, distinguished theological chair, mentor to the next generation. The paper trembled in my hand, not from the air conditioning of the public library, but from something deeper. Something that had slept in me for too long. Joy had warned me. He's not just alive, she said. He's being honored. It started with an innocent search. I was at the library scanning old obituaries and news clippings, looking for a photograph from Eleanor's hometown, something to use for a memorial collage I never finished. The librarian, a soft-spoken man with a lazy eye, brought me an old folder of community newsletters and diocesan bulletins. I didn't expect to find him there. I didn't expect the fire to reignite. But there he was, smiling, on a stage, arms outstretched. A halo of gold light catching the white collar of his vestments. I couldn't breathe. The teacup on my table tilted sideways, its contents spilling across the article, warping his face, until the ink ran like mascara on a painted saint. I wiped at it frantically, not because I wanted to preserve his image, but because I wanted to make sure I had seen it correctly. I had. I called Joy that night. Did you know, I asked without preamble. She didn't answer right away. I heard the clink of her wedding band against the receiver. I didn't want to tell you until I was sure you were strong enough. I'm not, I said, but I'm angry. That's stronger than silence. She sighed. He teaches now. Seminary outside Boston, and travels, speaks at retreats. My stomach turned. How many has he touched since we left? There was no answer. Only the distant sound of her clock ticking in the background. I need to go back, I said finally. To Havenwood. You're sure? No, I whispered. But I think Eleanor would be. The next morning, I packed slowly. I hadn't been to Havenwood in 28 years. Not since that storm-soaked night when we climbed the convent wall with rope and shaking legs. I didn't even know if the convent still stood. But I still remembered how to get there every turn, every patch of cracked pavement between here and the hill. I dug through my hallway closet past coats that didn't fit and scarves that still smelled of lavender. At the bottom, beneath an old knitting kit, I found the folder, Eleanor's final notebook. The one with the brown leather cover and a single bookmark pressed between pages like a blade. Don't let it be pretty lies. I tucked it into my bag beside an old paper map. I didn't trust GPS. Some journeys you had to take the long way. The drive was quiet. A rainy morning in March. The roads shimmered like silver threads unraveling across the countryside. Every mile brought back the taste of old prayers. I stopped once for gas and to clean the streaks off the inside of the windshield where my breath had fogged it from holding too much emotion. I reached the edge of Havenwood just before noon. The sign still stood. Welcome to Havenwood, founded 1847, elevation 1038 FT. The wood was chipped. Moss crept across the base, but the words were clear. So was the weight in my chest. I parked on the side of the road and sat for a moment, engine idling. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew it was time to stop whispering. It wasn't just the picture of Michael on the newsletter that pushed me. It was what I read beneath it. A young priest named John Michaels, one of his students, had recently spoken at a youth retreat in Pittsburgh. The article called him a beacon of restorative faith and quoted him saying, "I owe everything to my sister. She was a nun. She died young. She was brave." I blinked at that line for a long time. It couldn't be. Not many nuns had left convents in 1979. Even fewer had died young. I searched his name, found an old obituary for a girl named Rebecca Michaels. Died 1985. Quiet funeral. No mention of cause. Then I found a letter to the editor from a woman named Emily Hale, Sarah. She'd written anonymously about abuses in the church and how the sins we bury eventually raise their own children. That was what lit the final match. Back in my kitchen, the newsletter lay stained on the table. The tea had dried, leaving faint brown rings around Michael's smile. I picked up the old map, traced my finger across it until I found the road to the convent. The hill, the wall, the truth waiting like a storm, still pacing behind stone and memory. I would go back, not as Grace, not as Linda, but as the woman who remembered, the one who promised. And this time, I would not be silent. When I walked into the office, I didn't recognize him at first. But he looked at me like I was a ghost. The rectory of Havenwood hadn't changed much. The floors still creaked in the same uncertain way, and the air still smelled faintly of old books' beeswax and the kind of incense that stays with you even after you leave the chapel. The front desk was empty. A quiet clock ticked nearby. Outside, the sky had turned a flat gray, like it too was waiting. "Can I help you?" a voice called from the hall. He appeared in the doorway, young, maybe 35, dressed in a simple black shirt and collar. A face marked by sincerity, not yet worn by bureaucracy. His hands were still stained with ink from the pen he must have dropped moments before. And then his eyes met mine, and he paused. "Father John?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Yes," he said slowly. "Do I know you?" I stepped forward. "No, but you might know someone I did." He gestured toward a small office behind him. "Please come in." The office was dim, but clean-lined with old volumes and narrow windows. A faint scent of myrrh clung to the wood. Light filtered through the curtains, casting gold onto the wide desk, where a Bible sat open beside a stack of parish newsletters. I sat down carefully and placed the canvas tote bag on my lap. "I'm not here as Linda Peterson," I said. That name was borrowed. He raised his eyebrows. His fingers curled slightly against the desk. "My name is Grace Callahan." He froze. "Callahan," he repeated, eyes narrowing. "Yes," I said softly. "Your sister was Rebecca." He blinked twice, and the silence stretched thin between us. "I knew her," I continued. "Not well, but I remember the night she left the convent, and the reasons why." He looked away, jaw tightening. "No one ever talked about it. My parents said she lost her faith, that she wasn't strong enough." "She was stronger than any of us," I said, "but she wasn't believed, like the rest of us." I reached into the tote bag and pulled out the worn leather notebook. The edges were soft from years of turning. I set it gently on the desk. This belonged to a woman named Eleanor Hale. She kept records, notes, what we saw, what was done, what wasn't stopped. He stared at it like it was something sacred. "And this," I added, unfolding a single page from the inside pocket, "was her final letter to me." He took it with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned the page. "Tell them, don't let it be pretty lies." The light from the window shifted, landing square on the parchment, as if it too demanded to be seen. "I didn't know," he whispered. I always wondered, but I never had anything like this." "Most people don't," I said. "That's how he got away with it." He looked up. "You mean Father Michael?" I nodded. His voice grew hoarse. "He taught my seminary class. I once thanked him for saving my sister's soul." The words cracked between us like a cold confession. I reached across the table, not to comfort, but to offer steadiness. "You couldn't have known." He closed his eyes for a moment. "So what do we do?" I hesitated. "We find what they buried. We began in the rectory archives tucked behind the vestry in a room that smelled like cardboard and mothballs. Dust floated through the air like it had never been disturbed. Files in cracked folders lined rusted cabinets. Baptismal records, maintenance logs, donation receipts. John pulled down a box labeled 1976-1980. We opened it side by side. An hour passed. Then 2. Just as I was about to stand and stretch, John made a noise, a sharp inhale. I think I found something. He held up a thin letter on yellowing parish stationery. To Mother Agnes Convent of St. Mary, and Bin, from Diocese of Cleveland Archives Office, date October 12, 1977. We acknowledge receipt of your correspondence regarding concerns involving Father Michael Callahan's pastoral guidance and confession protocol. As stated, the matter is being reviewed with discretion by Bishop Carter's office. Until further notice, please refrain from further documentation. This is a sensitive issue involving the integrity of the priesthood. John's hands shook. They knew, I said. He nodded slowly. Someone knew, and they silenced her. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. They moved him, I said. Not because he was innocent, but because they wanted to preserve the appearance of sanctity. And they did, John murmured. They gave him awards, pulpits, students. His voice caught. But that ends now, I said. We looked at each other, strangers barely tethered by memory, and yet bound by something deeper, the refusal to stay silent. John reached across the table, resting his fingers lightly on Eleanor's notebook. We don't need a miracle, he said. We just need the truth to echo louder than the lie. Outside, the wind swept across the stone steps like a whisper turning into a warning. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid to be heard. Not every courtroom has a judge. Some just have an audience finally ready to listen. The room was small. Wooden paneled walls. 1 crucifix, 2 chairs. A window with no view, just frosted glass that blurred the world outside into light and shadow. The door clicked shut behind me. John had asked if I wanted company, but I said no. There are some ghosts you have to face alone. I sat down. The canvas tote at my feet held Eleanor's notebook and the letter from 1977, the one that proved someone knew. On the desk in front of me, a cup of water. I hadn't touched it. My mouth was dry, but my resolve was steady. The bishop, a young man named Reynolds, had arranged this. He called it a reconciliation opportunity, but we both knew what it really was. A reckoning. The door opened. I didn't look up right away. I heard the footsteps. Slow. Familiar. Then the silence. When I looked, he was already staring. Father Michael Callahan. Older. Heavier. His once dark hair now salt and ash. The lines around his eyes were deeper, but the gleam in them hadn't dulled. Not until he saw me. He didn't recognize me at first. But something flickered, confusion, then calculation. And then recognition landed in his face like a dropped mask. Grace, he said. His voice cracked slightly. I said nothing. His gaze swept the room. So, this is what you've been chasing all these years. I reached into the tote and pulled out the notebook. I opened it to the page Eleanor had marked in red ink. I read aloud. He said pain was a form of devotion. That silence proved we understood the sacrifice. He flinched, only slightly, but I saw it. A muscle near his jaw twitched. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. I was 16, I said. Sarah was 15. Eleanor wrote everything down. Every time he touched her wrist during confession. Every time Joy left the chapel shaking. I never, he began. Don't, I said sharply. The air in the room shifted. Cold from the vent above, but hot from the weight of memory. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here so someone finally has to hear it out loud. He moved toward the window. His reflection blurred in the frosted glass. There's no proof. Not anymore. There's this, I said, lifting the letter from the diocese. And the bishop agrees. Enough for action. His voice turned bitter. What action? I'm retired. What can they do? Strip my title. They already did, I said. As of this morning, you may not wear the collar anymore. I stood clutching the notebook to my chest. But we carry the scars. He turned, face reddening. You don't understand what it was like then. We were under pressure, expectations, isolation. No, I said, steady now. You don't get to rewrite it as loneliness. He looked at me for a long, still moment, and I saw it, the flicker of fear. The first time I'd ever seen it in him. You thought we'd stay silent forever, I said. You thought you outlasted us. I walked to the door and turned back once more. But truth doesn't wilt like vows. It waits. Later that week, the diocese released its findings in a quiet press release. Following an internal investigation and credible testimony, Father Michael Callahan has been formally removed from clerical duties. Due to statute limitations, no civil charges will be pursued. It was 3 paragraphs long, no apology, no names but his. But people started asking questions. John said the phones at the parish rang for hours that afternoon. Some parishioners were angry, some were broken, but some, mostly the older women, came in and just sat quietly in the chapel, candles trembling in their hands. Joy sent me a photo, a vigil someone had left on the front steps of St. Mary's. 3 white lilies, a note that read, "For those who ran." You were right to. The chapel was open that evening. The same one where I used to kneel as a girl. The one where Sarah whispered that she wasn't sure God could hear us anymore. The one where Eleanor said, "They built this place to silence us. Let's make it echo." I walked in alone. The pews were worn now, wood chipped at the corners. The candles still smelled like beeswax and longing. I sat in the back and opened Eleanor's notebook one last time. At the very back, barely legible beneath the ink bleeding through old pages, she had scribbled something years before she died. They won't believe the first time, maybe not the second, but one day someone will listen, and that's the day we rise. I closed the book and rested it on my lap. I thought I was done, but someone was calling me back to the hill. It took 28 years, 3 names, and 5 graves before I could finally sit still in the garden. The rosemary had grown in thick, reaching past the stone path in soft green waves. Lavender danced beside it, swaying gently in the late summer breeze. Birds sang from the branches overhead, their songs light unburdened. The chapel bell no longer rang for silence, it rang for welcome. They called it St. Mary's Haven now. Not a convent, not a shelter, a space to rest, a space to begin again. The diocese, perhaps in guilt or grace, had handed the property over after the investigation. The bishop said, "Do what you will with it. Perhaps something good can grow there again." I took him at his word. We tore down the old gates, painted the walls in colors warm and wide, kept the chapel, yes, but filled the pews with soft cushions, tea trays, and the quiet shuffle of women learning to take up space. Some came to stay a night, some stayed longer. Most didn't talk at first. We didn't make them. There were no collars here, no vows, just a small team of women who knew what it was to hold their breath for too long. Joy passed before the transition, her laughter lingering only in my memory, now folded into hymns and tea towels, and the name of the reading room, the Rose Room. But Sarah, my Sarah, came back. She returned the following spring, her voice quieter, her eyes wiser. Jo had passed 2 years before. Cancer, swift and cruel. Her children grown, she arrived with a single suitcase and a photo of a younger self she didn't recognize. I met her at the new gate with open arms. "You came back," I whispered. "I never really left," she replied, pressing her forehead to mine. We stood in the garden long after sunset. Today, I sat on the bench beneath the old pear tree, a basket beside me lined with cloth and still warm bread. A little sparrow hopped onto the edge, eyeing the crust with greedy approval. In my lap lay Eleanor's notebook, worn and creased, the corners softened by time and handling. On the final page, she had written, "Place a stone for me. Somewhere the wind still remembers our names. I had waited long to do it, and so last week we began 5 stones. Flat, smooth river stones carved with nothing more than names and years, simple and sacred. We nestled them in a curve of the garden beneath the chapel's east window, where the morning light lands first and the lavender grows strongest. Martha Millie Harland, 1931-1980, Eleanor Catherine Hale, 1944-1997, Joy Rose Adler, 1946-2003, Sarah Emily Michaels, 1947, Alive and Still Stubborn, Grace Callahan, 1939, Still Whispering. The last stone mine rests unclaimed, a placeholder, a promise, a reminder. Sarah stood beside me when we placed them. Her fingers traced each name like a prayer. When she got to hers, she laughed softly. "Well, now I've got no excuse," she said. "I guess I better outlive this lavender." Children came sometimes, with mothers, grandmothers, aunts, some drawn by the rumors of peace, some because they had nowhere else to go. One girl, a quiet, wide-eyed thing with a pillow clutched to her chest, sat near me this morning while I sipped my tea and let the sun warm my knees. She watched me for a while, then asked, "Are you a nun?" I smiled. "I used to be." She nodded solemnly, like that answer made perfect sense. Then she leaned her head against my arm, and we sat like that 2 souls and a sparrow in the shadow of the pear tree. Sometimes people ask if I feel I've been healed. I don't know what healing looks like, but I know how it sounds. It sounds like laughter over soup. It sounds like Eleanor's words read aloud in a workshop by a woman who finally dares to share. It sounds like Joy's hymn playing on an old cassette deck while someone knits beside the fire. It sounds like Sarah saying, "It's okay. We made it." Before the sun set today, I knelt beside the 5 stones. I brushed the dirt gently from each one, checked the lavender roots, placed a sprig of rosemary by Martha's name. Then I touched the last stone mine. "For the voice I almost lost," I whispered. Behind me, the door to the chapel creaked open. Someone entering for the first time. Another story, another beginning. I stayed a little longer. The wind moved through the garden, not loud, not soft, just enough. Once it held our silence, now it holds our stories. I didn't mean to finish it on a Tuesday. But there I was, sunlight slipping across the floor of my small bedroom at St. Mary's Haven. The last page of Eleanor's notebook open beside me, and the old recorder resting between my palms, like a question waiting to be answered. It had been sitting there for months. Same one I bought at the drugstore all those years ago. Same red button, same hum of possibility when it clicked on. This time, though, I wasn't afraid of the sound of my own voice. This time I knew what I wanted to say. Click. My name is Grace Callahan. I was once Sister Grace of the Convent of St. Mary and Bin. I lived behind walls. I survived silence. And I left, not because I lost faith, but because I finally learned where to place it. I paused. Outside the window, I heard someone raking leaves. A girl laughed somewhere in the garden. The world kept going as it should. I'm recording this not for justice. That came in pieces, not for vengeance. That left me long ago. But for memory for the women who couldn't speak and the ones still learning how. I took a slow breath. For Sarah, for Joy, for Martha, for Eleanor. For the girl who once shook behind a confessional curtain, and for the girl who just last week asked if I used to be a nun. I smiled then because I could see her clearly. She'd found the bench near the stones, ran her finger across the names, then sat quietly with her pillow in her lap, like she was trying to understand something wordless. Maybe she will, someday. And maybe someone will hand her this recording not as proof, but as a promise that the story didn't end with escape, that it became something more. Click. I labeled the tape in Eleanor's faded ink to whoever still remembers. Then I placed it gently in the chapel's archive box beneath her notebook, beside a folded photo of the 5 of us, young, brave, terrified. Still whole in that moment. It's strange. When you speak something out loud, the weight changes. It doesn't disappear, but it settles into your bones like something earned. I don't know how much time I have left, but I know I used it well. And the hill that once held my fear, it grows lavender now. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, you can hear 5 women laughing in the garden.